For me, it's a great responsibility. It's a great honor. Krug is very exciting, and Krug being very small, I have the chance to know every single plot, every single grower supplying a grape to Krug, as well as every new fantastic place where Krug is enjoyed around the world. Krug started in 1843 with my great-great-great-grandfather, Johann Joseph Krug, who was German, who had been working in another champagne house for almost 10 years. And he wanted to create a champagne whose taste would not only be extraordinary, but very consistent. And he proposed this new champagne to his boss, who didn't buy the idea, and he left. And at the age of 43 years old, he started Krug from scratch. And he is, in my opinion, Johann Joseph Krug is probably the only champagne founder who started a house with an idea of taste. He didn't inherit a business. He didn't put champagne on a portfolio of other stuff he was selling around the world. He started from scratch because he wanted to make this champagne with a different taste, an extraordinary taste. 165 years later, 6 generations later, when people come to Krug, when they tell me why they love Krug, they talk about the taste. What is fascinating is that among those people, you have the people who know all the details behind the product, you know, the name of the grape, the percentage, the date of harvest, etc. But most of the people know nothing about the process. They just fell in love one day with a glass of Krug because the taste is different, because the taste is extraordinary again. You know, when you first sip Krug, it's all about a revelation. There is an explosion of flavors. It fills your mouth. It's very rich, very intense, and at the same time very elegant. Tasting Krug is like sharing at the same time all the ingredients of a great wine experience and a very exciting champagne one. As a child, in a family of 5, I was living next door to the Krug cellar. So I was living with the noise of the cask being rolled in the cellier. I was living with the smell and the aromas of the wines fermenting during after harvest. So I was really born at Krug, and I'm sure that Krug was part of my life. I also had Krug on my lips the day I was born, which is a family tradition. And therefore, I'm probably one of the very few people in the world who doesn't remember the day I had Krug. So I was grown up in this Krug mood and smell and aroma and obviously culture because I was living next door to my grandfather and my uncle. So Krug was really part of the family without being the subject of the day. And the very first time I had a Krug conversation with my father was the day I had my business diplomas, and I was leaving school and I was looking for a job. And I got a job somewhere, and this is the first time ever. I was 23 when my father proposed me a counter proposal. He proposed me a job at Krug, and the idea was to start working with him because he was planning to retire in 15 years. And obviously, you don't learn Krug overnight. Learning Krug is a daily, very consistent work. Relationship with the growers, small tastings every day, relationship with the Krug lovers too, because they are very important in the life of Krug. So it took more than 15 years until the day my father retired and gave me the leadership of the Champagne Committee, where he still stands, by the way. In this business, you learn every day because every year is a new challenge. Every year, the challenge is set by nature. And nature will decide on the quality of the crop. Nature will decide on the quantity of the crop. But Krug has built its reputation in blending a champagne, which is called Krug Grande Cuvée, which is a blend of different years, which is a champagne that tastes the same every year, whatever the base year. So Krug is all about recreating its taste every year. So every year, nature gives us a completely different quality, and with this base of quality, and with the immense collection of reserve wines from the previous years we kept, we blend a blend which is a blend of 6, 7, sometimes 10 different years that has to be consistent. And you do not learn this type of artistry in books. It is not about science. There is no recipe, no formula. It's all about taste, memory of taste. And every year we have 1,000 tastings until the day we decide on the blend. I've been doing it for 20 years with my father and my uncle who started in the early 60s. So we have thousands and thousands and thousands of tasting memories in the tasting room that contribute to elaborate this champagne with a very unique taste. 2009 was a very good harvest for sure. So we have just started to taste the wines. We've made 200 different wines at Krug. So it's too early to talk about the quality of the wines. It looks very, very good. We don't know yet whether we'll make a vintage or not. We'll take the decision at the end of spring next year. In Asia, we have two major markets. The first one is Japan, which is all about emotion, wine and food matching, history, tradition, craftsmanship, family. There is no other place in the world where I see people crying while I'm organizing tasting. They love Krug. It's all about this emotion. It is very deep, and I strongly believe that Krug matches their culture. And you have a market which is considered as new, but which is not new for Krug, which is Hong Kong. And Krug has always been in Hong Kong thanks to the English wine merchant. But today, Hong Kong, as you know, is booming. It's really a wine market. And people are very aware of where the good names are. And as you may know, Krug is, for most people, Krug is not known as a champagne. Krug is known as the great wines within champagne. And those people, they follow the ratings, they follow the critics, etc. And there is no other champagne that is rated as well, as consistently well as Krug is. And therefore, the Chinese in Hong Kong are completely mad with Krug because they know that Krug belongs to this world of the finest wine. They also know that Krug is a champagne that you can age. And it's interesting to see that the Chinese in Hong Kong are now behaving like the oldest families in England who've been keeping and aging Krug for so long. So when they buy the 98 vintage, they buy the 98 vintage because they love the taste, but they also buy the 98 vintage because they know it's endless aging potential. There are new markets, of course. With a great champagne, you do not develop a new market overnight because you have to go through education. So you have to go through the trade, you have to go through the merchant, you have to go through the sommelier. So you do not make a market overnight. And markets like Russia, India, Brazil will be markets for Krug, but we still need a bit of time. Well, the economic climate has made life more difficult in 2009, especially for the people who retail Krug and sell Krug. I believe that Krug was not in the bling-bling type of champagne because Krug is all about taste, and people who want to drink Krug still want to drink Krug. The mood was not as good this year for very, very obvious reason. This being said, Krug has been through a much more difficult recession in the past. In 1929, all the business stopped overnight, and Krug was not as international as it is today. We had the war, we had the First World War, and you may know that Champagne has been shut down for 5 years during the First World War, and my great-grandfather was a prisoner of war, and people had to manage Krug and to make the wine, and we still find on the market some 1915 vintages which are fantastic, so the job had been done. In 1929, during the recession, we made one of the most legendary vintages of Krug ever. So the way I work with my team, it has to be very, very long term. And if we decide to make a 2009 vintage, we'll make a 2009 vintage for people who will drink it in the 2020s. So this is where we have to project ourselves today. It is too early to say whether the climate change will change the taste of champagne or not. I think some people a few years ago have tried to panic the public. Champagne has been through very, very, very hot years, excessive years in the past, and we made the most beautiful vintages. Those who know the 76, the legendary 59, or even the 47 vintages made by Krug know what I'm talking about. So champagne is all about blending, and it is about blending different plots, different type of grapes. And in a year which is too warm, the art of blending is this ability of going in those villages where you find wines with more acidity, life, freshness that will counterbalance the richness of the year. So personally, I'm not very worried about short term about this global warming. What we see is the fact that harvests are now earlier in September. We see that the maturation is slightly quicker, but this is why at Krug we tend to work on specific plots that we can follow individually, and we decide for each individual plot the date of the harvest on a balance which is between the sugar and the potential alcoholic content and the freshness of the grape. But freshness for sure is a key word at Krug. And by the way, people are always amazed by this richness in a glass of Krug, this intensity around what they call the freshness backbone of Krug. So I'm not worried yet. When people talk about investment and champagne, Krug is one of the very few names they have in mind. Not only because Krug is rare and fantastic, but also because Krug has this very unique, very special aging potential. And people know that a bottle of Krug 98 purchased today, if well stored, will be absolutely fantastic in 20, 30, or who knows, 50 years. So Krug is really one of those few champagnes that you can age a long time, which is very, very safe. I don't know in the Krug history one vintage that went out of the track. So they all had a fantastic aging story. Last week with some friends, I had a surprise because they came with their last bottle of Krug 28, which was almost as fresh as the champagne we are drinking today. So if it is not an evidence of the aging potential of Krug, what else?